Welcome to another edition of Conversations About Mental Health. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry, Inclusion Specialist for Volunteers of America Behavioral Health Program. Today's guest is Sam Partridge, Crisis Counselor here at VOAWW. I spoke with her about working with clients and callers who are either incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. I want to thank Sam for sharing her vast experience and insight and sharing tips for working with this population. Here's that interview. So I wanted to, like I sent you the little basic questions that we kind of went over it last time. And I always start off by just getting a little bit of background, just a brief background about, your career in counseling and how you got into, what you're doing now. And then also, if you could just add, what is your passion? Why did you choose this particular field and this particular area to really concentrate on?
Oh gosh, Kevin, you're getting personal. Okay. Oh, well,
Well, I mean,
I
you tell me as much as you feel comfortable talking about.
yes. No, absolutely. I mean, for the most part, I'm an open book. So, um, I guess I'll start with, experience. I have been in crisis intervention, specifically suicide crisis intervention, I think in total now about 10 years. So I've been 3 years here with VOA, and then I did 7 years of volunteer service back in California. And there it was very similar, but I also got to facilitate a survivors of suicide group, which was really, really interesting and very rewarding. Um, I worked at a reentry center, which is what I think is going to fall more into play with what we're talking about today. So that is when I was primarily working with formerly incarcerated people. Um, Connecting them to different resources. It was a really cool place. We called it a one-stop shop, right? So we had a multitude of different agencies under one roof. And we can talk more about how that, is super beneficial for that population. And then, like, while in Washington, I worked briefly at Western State Hospital for the NGRI program, which is the not guilty by reason of insanity. So that was a really interesting population. That was like severe mental health combined with, you know, individuals who would have otherwise been incarcerated. And so I actually just said, I'm going to volunteer on a suicide line. And I did that and I absolutely fell in love with it. That really gave me the taste for working with mental health, working within mental health, um, populations. And then in terms of working with formerly incarcerated, that just kind of happened. It was back in California and the agency needed, someone there kind of part time. I had no idea really what the agency did. I knew it was helping people who were getting out of jails and prisons with resources, but I didn't know what resources. It was all very, new to me. But my degree is in sociology, so I just have that innate interest in people. And the incarcerated population, I think, is just really I think it's kind of interesting to say, but they're very fascinating to me. I think they're a very special population because they encompass so many social issues that we all work with. I mean, you have your mentally ill individuals, you have individuals who utilize substances, you have homelessness, you have various forms of abuse and trauma. They're very multi layered, and it can be very complex trying to figure out how to best support that population, specifically when you have mental illness involved.
Well, I'm glad you said that because one of the things that I think we as a society often do is we want to put people in boxes. We want to attach a
Right.
label to their forehead and say, okay, well, this
Yeah.
person's a criminal, this person's, a worse criminal, or this person's like
Yeah.
they're homeless, but if they only just worked hard and got a job, they wouldn't be homeless. We want to just
Yes.
kind of, stick them in this little category. And
Yeah.
a lot of times people don't realize the lived experiences that people have are so unique to that individual. And as
Right.
we've talked about before, I mean, I've known several people that have been incarcerated for up to 20
Mhm.
years. and
Right.
each story was different. They're good people. They're giving back to their community by working with people in the prison system now. But in
That's
some
awesome.
cases, it was wrong place, wrong time. And
Mhm.
sometimes there was substance abuse involved. Sometimes there was, I know one guy in particular wound up in prison for 13 years. He was doing residential, not residential, commercial burglaries. And
Oh
because
goodness, yeah.
somebody brought a gun to one of the burglaries, then it bumped it up to a felony, and that added another 8 or 9 years to his sentence.
Yeah.
So circumstances are always unique, I think.
They are absolutely, and I think you touched, right on that point that there is so much beneath the surface. And, when we talk to someone, especially on a crisis line, we only have a short amount of time to figure out how to best service this person. You're trying to figure out how to help someone in this amount of time, but they've had this much stuff that's gone on in their life, the trauma, the experiences, the wrong places and the wrong times. I mean, we have to figure out and be considerate and compassionate of so many things that they may have encountered in their lives and things that we may not be able to understand. And I think that's a big thing is not going in with preconceived notions, you know, um, specifically working with formerly incarcerated, right? There is that label of you're a convict, you're a felon, um, you're a bad person, and it can be hard to service someone with those initial thoughts. And I think that is, one of the more important things when working with that population is to take a step back and remember that's an individual. And, they may not have gotten there, intentionally. It could have, we don't know what the reason is that someone ended up in jail and prison. And when you have people who are mentally ill, a lot of crimes that are, happening with individuals who are mentally ill are often coupled with substance use. So, that would usually be considered a co-occurring or a co-occurring disorder. So you have substance use coupled with mental illness. Um, and those populations are really hard. A lot of people will end up with crimes because you have untreated mental illness. So you're then, self medicating and you're doing crimes to, fulfill that lifestyle. And sometimes those are the crimes that wind people up in jails and in prisons. And then they get there and they are able to receive their treatments and attend counseling or attend, NA programs, AA programs. But then what is that process afterwards? And I think that's, one of the bigger disconnects is we have people in jail and they're receiving all these benefits, they're being well taken care of. And then we're like, okay, you did your time and now you're out for society. Society is going to take care of you now. Um, but what do we do for people who, have been criminals their whole life, who, don't have jobs, they don't have health insurance, they don't have, transportation, they don't have ID to get those, they don't have housing. How do we then support individuals with those type of hurdles?
Well, and that's what I wanted to talk about because that's a perfect transition because
Yeah.
I used to work at an agency that had a program that would find employment for formerly incarcerated people. And in some cases, there
Hmm.
was mental illness involved or some type of disability, et cetera. So the program would reach out to business owners, for instance, and
Yeah.
say, hey, I have this client here. We're trying to get them a job at Walgreens or something like that.
Hmm.
And then a lot of times they would run into that fear. Okay, I'm going to hire this person, and are they going to steal from me, or are they going to, have a meltdown in front of some of our customers and things like that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a great point about it's just like with I've worked with trafficking survivors, for instance,
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah.
women who have been former prostitutes and et cetera. And the feeling sometimes is that okay, all you got to do is get them away from the pimp, get them out of the life, get them a place to live and a job, and we're all good, and we can just forget about them now because they're all set, right? But then
Yeah.
they're bringing in all of this emotional trauma into
Mhm.
this new reality of like, okay, now that I'm out of jail or I'm out of
Mhm.
the hospital or what have you,
Yeah,
How do I cope? I mean, it's hard enough to cope even if you don't have that type of background. So, what type of tips could
exactly.
you, what kind of tips could you give to counselors who maybe a younger counselor who said, "Hey, I got somebody on the line here, and they're really stressed out because now they're out of jail and they don't know what to do." Do you have any advice for just how to approach that individual?
I think one thing is standard and it goes for all colors, but with formerly incarcerated, compassion, um, an open mind. A lot of times we run into situations that we have never experienced. We can't, a lot of times we want to be empathetic on the phones and you want to tell someone I can relate. In those situations, a lot of people can't relate. And it's okay to say that, but to come from a point that I'm not going to judge you. At the end of the day, I'm a service provider, so I'm here to help you. I don't want to be another hurdle in your path. I understand that you're trying to reintegrate into society. How can I be a bridge for that? And, advocating and being a resource to these individuals who need it. We get people who call in, like you said, you have someone who's been trafficked or who's been a prostitute, and where do they begin? They have trauma. We have to take into account that they're afraid. So yes, they need to get back into society, but they're also worried that maybe their abuser is going to come and, hurt them, or if they have kids, to hurt their kids. And, we have to look at the whole picture. It's not always so black and white. So, being open and willing to work with the gray as well.
Well, one thing that I've had the good fortune to do is to work with and get to know people who have been formerly addicted to substance abuse. They've been substance abusers, or they've been incarcerated, and most of these people have wound up in jobs working with former substance abusers
Yep.
and or people who have been incarcerated, and as a counselor in that setting, they bring that extra insight and
Yeah.
experience into the interaction with the client or the patient, and it makes them even more effective.
Absolutely. That is actually so phenomenal that you bring that up, because that was actually one of the things. So back in California, in that reentry center towards the end, when I was working there, they had developed a program where, you bring individuals who had been formerly incarcerated, and they were working in a county agency. So they were given an opportunity to, get some working skills, get into a county department. And then from there, they get to serve as a peer mentor to say, hey, I've been where you're at and look at where I am now. And you're right. I mean, that I haven't been incarcerated, fortunately. And so I can't, really speak to someone. I can give my compassion. I can say, here's the resources I have to get you an ID, to get you transportation, to get this job. But at the end of the day, I can't relate to some of those struggles and that trauma that you have endured and accrued throughout that time. And someone with that lived experience can, I think it's like looking in a mirror, right? Where you can see that finish line, you can see what could be. And it brings hope, I would say. So if you have experiences sometimes, even like with family members, I also think that that can be helpful too. And just, really relating to people, humanizing people, humanizing that population, because I think they're so othered at times. Like you said, getting employment, you oftentimes are mandated to put that you've been incarcerated or you have a felony. The fear of having to do that, I can only imagine just automatically the defeat that that can give someone, to say, I'm going to be labeled as this already. What are my chances now? And so to have, agencies that have programs specifically set up for that, I mean, it's wonderful. And if there's people who have been there, come out of it and can give back, I think that's such a great way to help
Oh,
the population as well.
well, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the word othering, and
Mm.
I think that a lot of times that comes from fear. Again, it's just like the
Mhm.
business owner that's fearful
Yeah.
of somebody that they're employing, or perhaps maybe even you have fear around the people that have moved in next door. Because I
Yep.
know some people who were running these homes like halfway houses, and
Hmm.
and places like that for people who were
Yeah.
trying to get their feet back on the ground, and so the neighbors were very fearful of, oh, that house over across the street has these ex-felons in there and da 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 da. But
Yep.
I think that people that if the only reality that they know is of criminal activity or mental abuse, and it's been even normalized to a certain extent,
Hmm.
this is their
Right.
the only reality that they know. So they need a new reality, and they need to see, hey, I can get a job
Yes.
helping other felons, or I can get a job working with somebody who's been a substance abuser, and that gives them that new vision, I think, for their life.
Absolutely. And you bring up such a great point. This is their normal. This is their reality. And not to say the whole population, but for someone, if we get a caller and, they are suffering from severe PTSD and, they have very enmeshed relationships or what have it, it's, we have to have patience and understanding that one, oftentimes on a crisis line, you only have so much time. We're not going to change the world. But to know that, we are not meant to fix everything all at once. And this is all someone's known, up until this point for their entire life. So identifying those things, right? We're assessing and we're identifying the need. Hey, maybe I talked to this person and I've noticed they have maybe some, I don't, unhealthy, relationships, or they have an unhealthy outlook on relationships. This person could benefit from maybe counseling services. So I want to build my rapport. I want to let them know, hey, what if this is something that sounds good to you? Can I connect you to a resource? It's always just trying to get to know the person and, trying to do best to offer the resources, give them a say in their treatment. I think that's another thing, right? So often people, if you're, in custody too, you're institutionalized. Everything is, done for you, assigned for you. So giving that autonomy to someone too, I think is huge. Letting them have an active part in their recovery and their treatment. Um, I think that's a really big important part
Yeah,
as well.
I totally agree. I mean, and
Mhm.
I mean, what you're saying is so important. And I mean, just as a final thought on my part,
Yeah.
having worked with a lot of trafficking survivors, former prostitutes, former incarcerated people, a lot of times I got to know them fairly well before I even knew that. And
Yeah.
it was interesting because, in fact, I have a couple of pretty good friends who were former prostitutes, and I these are great people, hardworking,
Mhm.
degrees. I knew one woman that was trafficked when she was 14. She now has two
Oh my
master's
gosh.
degrees, and
Wow.
I forget about that until they mention something like, oh, yeah, when I got arrested in Las Vegas back in 2009. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think it just hits home that these are just fellow human beings, and for whatever reason, they
Exactly.
made the wrong choice or got hooked on drugs or whatever, but
Yeah.
they never stopped being that human being, and now they're
Exactly.
healthy and they're back to the person that they should have been all along, I
Yeah.
guess.
Absolutely. And, a lot of times people don't have that support system. And I think as crisis responders, as service workers, that is our job. That's our role to be there for people who have clearly not had these support systems in their lives. We want to be there to lift these people up. We want to be there to offer these chances. We don't want to condone bad behavior, of course. We want to encourage people to do the best that they can and to be helpful and, safe citizens. But they need someone to lend the hand to help them reach, bring them up. Um,
Absolutely.
and I don't know, I really enjoy working with that population, and I think that there's a lot of hope in there. That's just a small portion of who they are, you know.
Well, and just one final thought too about you said you really enjoy working with the population, and I think that comes through when you're working with people. I think they can tell if you are truly not, I don't want to say enjoying, but you're truly
Yeah.
dedicated or you're truly present or what have you. And then as opposed to the person who's, and in some cases it's burnout, The
Yeah.
counselors has maybe been doing this for 25 years, and
Yeah.
it's like you can just tell they are not there. They're just going through the motions, and the person can
Yeah.
tell that as the client can tell that as well.
Absolutely, and it's so easy to get there. I mean, it's hard helping people, and you can lose yourself in that. So, self-care is very important and having healthy boundaries, when we work and we service and we do the best we can to help, our clients, but yeah, you got to take care of yourself too, and it's okay to separate that.
Yep. Any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I think we just got to have patience. Be you know Beef up on your resources wherever you are. Yes, we're crisis line workers. I'm a crisis line worker, but you never know what that person is going to need, and it's important to, at the very least, know where to point them, because it's a hard system to navigate everything. So just be
Perfect.
helpful.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You have been listening to another edition of Conversations about Mental Health. Today's guest was Sam Partridge, crisis counselor for Volunteers of America, Western Washington Behavioral Health Program. I'm your host, Kevin P. Henry.